just hurt. I'm just hurt inside. I really am. You know, and then he brings up talking about it was a one-night stand with my mom and all that kind of stuff like that. It wasn't no one-night stand. I am hurt. I'm disappointed. I don't even know how to feel. I can't even believe somebody even have a question of how.
Who you say is definitely not your biological daughter. 30 years, you've known only one man to be your father, and you are devastated that he is now claiming you are not his biological daughter.
I'm 30 years old. 30 years old. And I have to deal with this? He had a relationship with her, he know it. You know it. It hurts me so much, and I have a lot of pain. You know, it's ridiculous to me. It doesn't make no sense.
Your Honor, this was like 25, 30 years ago. I'm 25 years old. I had a wife. And I was starting my life out, trying to start it over. So I was young, trying to, get my Mac on. I'm Mac Daddy. Just, after work. After I get off work. So I went back after work, and I picked her up, and we went to a hotel. I did.
The courtroom opens with the weight of decades pressing on every witness, every file, and every shaky explanation. Judge Lauren Lake, known for her relentless pursuit of clarity, sits with calm authority as yet another paternity and family law story unfolds, one filled with buried emotions, unspoken accusations, and lives shaped by assumptions rather than verified truth. In this case, a man enters court carrying more than legal papers. He carries years of resentment, disappointment, and financial burden connected to a child he claims he never believed was biologically his. He argues that a DNA test is his last hope for clearing a debt accumulated through years of Supreme Court child support enforcement. His frustration has grown into a personal storm, and now, standing before Judge Lake, he insists that the truth must finally be placed on record. Across from him stands the woman who believed for 30 years that he was her father. She walks into court heartbroken, bewildered, and deeply angry that a man she called Dad has now chosen to publicize doubts he kept in the shadows for decades. She expresses that she never imagined needing a court to confirm what she believed was already emotionally and morally settled. Her shock and pain fill the room, making the tension almost physical. Judge Lauren Lake listens to them both with her signature mix of compassion and firmness, examining not just the legal facts but the relationship between law and justice, a theme often discussed in the kind of thoughtful legal analysis you might hear on the Game-Changing Attorney podcast. She acknowledges how law deals with evidence, timelines, and documents, while justice deals with emotional truth, responsibility, and the moral weight of choices. This courtroom at this moment becomes both a legal battleground and a stage for emotional unraveling. The judge recognizes that family cases are never simply about statutes. They are about identity, betrayal, loyalty, and the lifelong consequences of secrets. As the case progresses, evidence begins unfolding piece by piece. The man presents a birth certificate with no father listed, an omission he claims supports his innocence. He also explains that years ago, a court entered a default decision naming him the father during a period when he says he was unavailable, a situation that left him legally responsible without giving him a fair chance to defend himself. This part of the case highlights the overlooked details that often determine outcomes in family court. The woman, however, insists that she grew up with no doubt. Her painful testimony, filled with memories, creates a vivid picture of her childhood and everything she believed was true. The emotional collision between her personal history and his legal claims forms the heart of the trial. Judge Lauren Lake carefully examines the inconsistencies in their stories. She notes the man's long silence about his doubts, a silence that allowed a child to grow into adulthood without the opportunity to know the truth earlier. She addresses the reality that sometimes people regret taking a DNA test, not because the test is wrong, but because finding the truth means facing years of emotional damage. As more testimony is given, the courtroom begins to mirror the intense, real-life stories covered in DNA test cheating stories, adoption stories full episodes, and episodes of the Divorce Course podcast. These stories always reveal how powerful the truth can be, even when it arrives too late to prevent all the harm. At one point, the judge reflects on the broader concept of justice in jurisprudence, a reminder that legal truth is not always aligned with personal truth. A man may be declared a father legally, yet remain emotionally distant. A woman may grow up believing she knows her father, yet still be forced to confront the possibility of deception. Testimonies from witnesses deepen the complexity of the case. A current spouse, who has only known the man for a few years, testifies about her own observations, adding layers of interpersonal conflict. Her presence highlights how paternity disputes do not only involve two people but spill into new families, new relationships, and new resentments. Another witness, one of the man's confirmed daughters, steps forward to defend the woman claiming to be her sister. She recalls childhood memories where their father introduced them as siblings, and she states with sincerity that she believes their sisterhood is real. Her testimony adds emotional weight and suggests that even when adults doubt or deny, children often recognize bonds before paperwork does. Through these testimonies, Judge Lauren Lake evaluates both direct and circumstantial evidence, subtly referencing principles similar to those found in the Adverse Inference in Evidence Act. For instance, recognizing that a long delay in raising doubts may indicate hidden motives or personal fears. As Judge Lake listens, she also reflects on how this case mirrors stories featured in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where individuals confront past mistakes and seek healing. She notes that avoiding the truth rarely protects anyone. Instead, it often prolongs pain. Throughout the hearing, the man continues insisting that his motivation for questioning paternity is rooted in truth and not prejudice or disapproval. The woman, however, believes his sudden doubts are connected to disagreements about her personal life and lifestyle choices. This disagreement reflects the common emotional intersections seen in many divorce cases, where legal conflicts disguise deeper interpersonal rifts. When the judge asks why he sent his daughter a harsh text message accusing her of not being his child, he claims he wanted to finally stop living what he believed was a lie. Judge Lake challenges this approach, reminding him that the delivery of truth matters. Even truth, when thrown like a weapon, can destroy relationships rather than mend them. The courtroom's emotional temperature rises as the daughter recounts how painful the message was, describing how her identity was shaken. She expresses that she never imagined needing to prove her existence or her father's love through a test ordered in a courtroom. Her vulnerability shifts the atmosphere, reminding everyone that paternity cases are not abstract legal puzzles but deeply personal human stories. Supporters on both sides step forward, sharing personal experiences that give Judge Lake additional context. The court hears about family conflicts, questions of loyalty, differences in lifestyle, and years of built-up misunderstandings. Each testimony helps the judge understand how a single unanswered question, "Who is my biological father?" can tear apart a family. As the judge prepares for the results, the atmosphere mirrors the tension seen in the Divorce Course podcast and complex family episodes often replayed in full-length paternity documentaries. Everyone knows the upcoming envelope contains not just medical data, but emotional closure or emotional destruction. Finally, Judge Lauren Lake receives the envelope containing the truth, a truth scientifically undeniable, legally powerful, and emotionally irreversible. The courtroom holds its breath, knowing that whatever comes next will reshape identities, relationships, and futures. What follows is the moment that defines the entire case. The results are read, proving that the man is indeed the biological father, contradicting decades of doubt and confirming the woman's lifelong belief. The reaction is instant, emotional, and raw. A lifetime of confusion collides with a single page of scientific truth. The man, confronted by the reality he avoided for years, begins to acknowledge his regrets. The woman, overwhelmed, expresses both relief and exhaustion. Judge Lake, recognizing the fragility of the moment, encourages them to rebuild, to communicate, and to use this truth as a new beginning rather than another weapon. This moment reflects the deeper meaning behind the phrase "truth changes everything." In paternity court, the truth can create families, break them apart, or force them into a new version of themselves. And in this courtroom, just like in every emotional case overseen by Judge Lauren Lake, the truth is not the end. It's the beginning of accountability, healing, and understanding. The air in the courtroom settles after the revelation, but the emotional turbulence continues. Even though the DNA results have ended one chapter, they open many new ones, chapters about responsibility, reconciliation, and the difficult path toward healing. Judge Lauren Lake has seen countless similar cases, yet each family's reaction to the truth is uniquely layered. She recognizes that while the law can declare someone a father in seconds, restoring decades of trust requires far more time, humility, and emotional effort. Immediately after the results, both father and daughter stand in a space shaped by shock. For him, the discovery is both a relief and a burden. Relief that the question has been answered, and burden because the truth exposes how much damage was caused by years of distance, assumptions, and silence. For her, it becomes an affirmation of identity, but also a reminder of how fragile that identity became the moment he doubted her. Judge Lake reflects inwardly on the paradox that often appears in family courts. People regret taking a DNA test not because they want lies, but because truth forces accountability. The truth releases people from legal confusion, but immediately binds them to emotional responsibility. It is one thing to argue against paternity. It is entirely another to be confronted with biological certainty. As the courtroom slowly stabilizes, the judge considers how this moment aligns with broader principles discussed in legal scholarship. Similar to topics covered on the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, she knows that legal truth must guide decisions, but real justice requires understanding the human condition, pain, fear, embarrassment, and the complicated patterns of family life. In many ways, this courtroom becomes a living study of the relationship between law and justice, a reminder that jurisprudence does not exist in a vacuum, but in real homes with real memories. The daughter's emotional release continues as she processes the judge's ruling. Her life suddenly makes sense again, yet the scars her father's doubts left behind remain. Judge Lake sees this conflict clearly and understands that in cases like these, reconciliation may be more difficult than delivering the results. She shifts her mindset from legal authority to guidance, drawing upon years of experience watching families fracture and rebuild under the courtroom lights. The father, meanwhile, must confront not only the truth, but also his own behavior. He must face how his skepticism, delivered harshly through text messages and spoken criticisms, shaped his daughter's sense of worth. His prior actions echo the types of mistakes highlighted in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where individuals eventually acknowledge that healing begins only when truth is met with sincere responsibility. Judge Lake considers how unresolved family tensions often spill into major disputes such as those heard in the Divorce Course podcast, where a single revelation can unravel years of stability. Here, The revelation does not destroy a marriage but threatens a lifelong bond. The courtroom becomes a place not just for unveiling truth, but for encouraging emotional repair. She also acknowledges the legal implications. The father's history of unpaid Supreme Court child support, owed due to default rulings, may now carry new meaning. He can no longer claim financial injustice if the biological truth confirms fatherhood. Legally, the past rulings stand, though emotional frustration may still linger. The judge knows that default judgments often lead to resentment, especially when someone believes they were named a parent unfairly. But in this case, the DNA results reinforce that the law acted in alignment with truth, even if the man believed otherwise for decades. As she reflects further, the judge recognizes how this scenario connects to the adverse inference in evidence act, a principle suggesting that when someone avoids establishing the truth early, it may imply fear of what that truth will reveal. The father's long delay in questioning paternity could be interpreted as avoidance rather than innocence. Judge Lake, however, balances legal interpretation with empathy. She knows that fear, pride, and emotional turmoil often cloud judgment, especially when infidelity, secrecy, or shame are involved. The courtroom atmosphere shifts slightly as the judge transitions into a more reflective lecture-like tone, a style reminiscent of thoughtful monologues found in adoption stories' full episodes, where the narrator explains not just what is happening, but why it matters. She stresses that families must understand the value of truth early, before resentment calcifies into hostility. She reminds both parties that DNA tests are not weapons but tools for clarity. The judge then turns her attention to the father's wife and the witnesses who testified. She notes how family members brought forward pieces of the emotional puzzle. Some described disrespect. Others described a troubled history. Some defended the daughter's identity with unwavering conviction. These differing accounts mirror the complex dynamics often discussed in DNA test cheating stories, where one revelation affects not just two people but an extended network of relationships. Judge Lake also considers the psychological impact on the father's other children. For them, the possibility of losing a sister they've known all their lives created confusion and sadness. Families often underestimate how deeply siblings absorb emotional upheaval, especially when identity and belonging are at stake. The judge's goal becomes not just restoring clarity, but preventing future fractures within the family. As she addresses the court again, she reminds everyone that truth without compassion can be destructive. The father must now accept not only biological responsibility, but emotional accountability. The daughter must allow space for healing, but also protect her own emotional boundaries. Judge Lake urges both of them to approach reconciliation slowly, recognizing that rebuilding a relationship requires patience, vulnerability, and forgiveness. She encourages professional counseling, acknowledging that deep wounds may require structured guidance. Her tone reflects the kind of support heard in recovery-based conversations, much like those found in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where emotional healing is treated as a journey rather than a single moment. Beyond the emotional elements, the judge also wants the courtroom to understand the significance of legal accuracy. In many cases, truth emerges only when both law and science work together. The law cannot rely solely on personal recollections or assumptions. Facts must guide decisions. This is why DNA testing has become so crucial in modern family jurisprudence, shaping the meaning of justice in a way older generations could never fully anticipate. Judge Lake then transitions into addressing how unresolved paternity issues often intersect with stage and divorce case complications. Although this case is not a divorce proceeding, the emotional strains mirror what married couples experience when trust dissolves and doubt creeps in. The father-daughter relationship has suffered similar fractures, disagreements, accusations, emotional abandonment, and long stretches of silence, all of which resemble the pattern seen in troubled marriages. As she continues speaking, the judge recognizes how important it is for future generations to break cycles of silence. Children should not grow up confused about their identity. Parents should not wait decades to confront doubts. Families should not allow assumptions to shape their emotional reality. The courtroom becomes a reminder of what happens when fear replaces communication. This case also highlights themes seen in the Divorce Course podcast, where people often realize that avoidance only magnifies emotional wounds. The father's avoidance of truth for so long led to misunderstandings, anger, and irreversible pain. Judge Lake emphasizes that the truth was always available, through honest conversation or testing, but pride and fear delayed the revelation for 30 years. The judge notes that while the truth has now been confirmed, the real work begins outside the courtroom. She advises the father to approach his daughter not with defensiveness, but with openness, acknowledging the hurt he caused. She advises the daughter to allow dialogue, but also to express her boundaries clearly. The courtroom's role, she explains, is to provide the truth, but families must decide what to do with that truth. They can allow it to divide them further or use it as a foundation to rebuild trust. The father eventually expresses regret, not just for doubting her, but for the harshness with which he delivered his doubt. Judge Lake sees sincerity begin to emerge, though the wounds remain fresh. She encourages him to begin small. Consistent communication, respect, patience, and the willingness to listen without reacting defensively. The daughter, still emotional, acknowledges the possibility of healing but admits she cannot forget the pain instantly. Judge Lake respects her truth as well. Healing cannot be forced. It must grow organically. The judge reminds both of them that the truth did not destroy their bond. It only exposed its fragility. What they do next determines whether that bond can be strengthened or permanently broken. Even though the DNA results have already illuminated the truth, the courtroom remains charged with unresolved emotion, because truth alone cannot erase years of misunderstanding, nor can a single judgment undo the layers of hurt built over a lifetime. Judge Lauren Lake knows this deeply. She has seen many families learn the truth yet still struggle to turn that truth into healing. And now, in her courtroom, she guides this family toward the next chapter, one defined not by doubt but by responsibility. She observes the father as he processes what the DNA test revealed. His face tells a complicated story, a mix of remorse, surprise, relief, and the heavy realization of accountability finally landing where it always belonged. He spent years believing a narrative built from fear, pride, and youthful mistakes, and now he must reconcile that narrative with scientific fact. His shoulders are heavy, not because of the court's ruling, but because of the emotional responsibility he cannot escape. He recalls the excuses he once made, the emotional distance he maintained, the harsh words he delivered whenever conflict arose. These regrets echo the kinds of transformative reflections often heard in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where people finally confront the consequences of long-buried actions. Judge Lake sees the shift in him, not dramatic, but sincere. He now stands as a man who must rebuild something he once thought was beyond repair. The daughter's reaction, meanwhile, is layered with raw emotion. She feels vindicated, yet deeply wounded. The truth confirms what she always believed, but the process of defending her identity against the man she called Dad has left scars that won't disappear easily. Her trembling breaths reveal gratitude for the truth, but her eyes reveal something deeper, a fear that even biological proof cannot guarantee emotional safety. Judge Lauren Lake studies both of them. Her experience has taught her that in family court, a DNA result may close the legal question, but opens a new emotional one. How do we heal from what the truth exposes? Her courtroom becomes a place not only of judgment, but of guidance, similar to the reflective tone heard in the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, where legal outcomes intersect with personal accountability. She begins addressing the father directly, highlighting the reality that the law has always recognized him as the father, even when he doubted it. Yet she also acknowledges the emotional complexity, how an undeveloped relationship, silent assumptions, and unresolved conflicts can distort what should have been an unbreakable bond. She reminds him that the truth came late, but not too late to begin building something new. Justice is not just found in verdicts, it is found in the actions people take after the verdict. Turning to the daughter, the judge speaks with compassion. She knows this young woman carries years of emotional weight, abandonment, confusion, resentment, and the pain of feeling like a stranger in a family where she should have felt rooted. Judge Lake validates those feelings, emphasizing that identity crises caused by parental doubt can be devastating. Her tone resembles the empathetic guidance often found in the Divorce Course podcast, where emotional repair is emphasized as much as legal clarity. The daughter listens quietly, trying to balance her emotions. She is torn between the relief of truth and the heaviness of everything she endured because that truth was questioned. She thinks about the text message that first shattered her sense of belonging, the dismissive comments, the moments she felt humiliated or dismissed. She also thinks about the few warm memories she had, the fleeting instances where she did feel wanted. Judge Lake sees this internal conflict and urges her to allow space for healing without forcing herself to reconcile instantly. This is where Judge Lake brings forward an important lesson about truth. Truth changes everything, but it doesn't fix everything. That responsibility falls on the people involved. The courtroom shifts into a reflective atmosphere as the judge addresses the witnesses who testified earlier, the supportive daughter who believed in the truth, the spouse who echoed doubts, the family members who were caught in the emotional crossfire. Their presence represents the ripple effect common in real family law cases. One unresolved truth affects not just a parent and child, but an entire generation. Judge Lake explains how families often create narratives to protect themselves from uncomfortable truths. These narratives sometimes lead to adverse inference, assumptions built on silence, avoidance, or selective memory. In this case, the father's unresolved shame about cheating, fear of consequences, and desire to protect his military career shaped a decades-long misunderstanding. While the law seeks evidence, the heart often seeks protection, even when that protection becomes harmful. She extends her analysis further, connecting it to the concept of justice in jurisprudence. Justice is not solely about legal outcomes. It's about creating environments where truth and compassion coexist. This case demonstrates how the law uses tools like DNA testing to uncover truth, while justice requires families to transform that truth into connection rather than conflict. The judge also reminds them how common these situations are, similar to stories seen in DNA tests, cheating stories, and adoption stories full episodes, where a single truth reshapes entire histories. She encourages the father and daughter to recognize that they now stand at a crossroads. They can either allow old wounds to become permanent barriers or take steps toward establishing a relationship based on honesty, transparency, and respect. As she continues, Judge Lake highlights the symbolic importance of the evidence stage in divorce case, style clarity. Even though this is not a divorce, the emotional patterns overlapping here are the same: betrayal, doubt, miscommunication, and the struggle to rebuild trust. She emphasizes that families must confront conflict with maturity rather than allow years to pass in silence. The emotional estrangement between father and daughter resembles the conflicts between divorcing spouses far more than either party realizes. She then directs her attention to the importance of healing practices. Counseling, she suggests, can offer a neutral space where both father and daughter can express unresolved pain without the defensiveness that often occurs in family disputes. She knows that therapy and guided communication can transform resentment into understanding. These approaches parallel the healing journeys discussed in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where people confront past pain in order to restore their futures. The father nods slowly, acknowledging the judge's guidance. He realizes that the DNA result is not the end of his responsibilities. It is merely the beginning. He must now demonstrate consistency rather than defensiveness, empathy rather than excuses. Judge Lake encourages him to rebuild the relationship with honesty. She warns him that healing requires sustained effort, not temporary remorse. The daughter, still emotional, acknowledges the possibility of reconciliation, but makes it clear that she cannot forget the pain easily. Judge Lake assures her that forgiveness does not require forgetting. It requires understanding. It requires acknowledging the hurt without letting that hurt define the rest of her life. As she prepares to conclude the case, Judge Lauren Lake reflects aloud on the deeper lesson. Truth may arrive late, but when it does, it invites people to start anew. She reminds both parties that while the DNA test resolved the biological question, the emotional work is now in their hands. The next steps will determine whether they become strangers who share DNA or a father and daughter who finally understand one another. Before dismissing the court, she emphasizes how this case mirrors the complexity seen in the Divorce Course podcast and the emotional depth in personal testimonies shared in various podcast communities. Families often function like legal systems. When communication breaks down, misunderstandings grow and unresolved questions lead to conflict. But when truth is brought forward, with guidance, with wisdom, and with accountability, healing is possible. The final moments in the courtroom are quiet but meaningful. There is no dramatic reconciliation, no sudden embrace, no instant forgiveness. Instead, there is something more realistic and more valuable: possibility. The father steps away from the stand with a new understanding of the journey ahead. He knows he cannot undo the past, but he also knows that truth offers him a chance to be better, to be present, to be honest. The daughter leaves the courtroom knowing she was validated, her identity confirmed, her truth recognized. But she also leaves with emotional exhaustion, aware that the journey toward healing will take time. Judge Lauren Lake closes the session with a sense of solemnity mixed with hope. Her courtroom has once again become a place where truth didn't just settle a case, it reshaped lives. This aligns with her philosophy that justice is not about punishment. It is about clarity, responsibility, and growth. Outside the courtroom, the world feels different for both father and daughter. They walk separate paths for now, but each carries the same truth, one that can either divide them further or gradually bring them closer. The outcome will depend not on science or law, but on their willingness to rebuild trust one conversation at a time. And this is the real legacy of truth. It changes everything, but only if people choose to grow from it.